Okay, in this video we're going to implement the game mode and the game state in the way that I discussed in the previous one. So just pretty much a basic hit counter, so anytime a player shoots another player, that variable is going to go up and we're going to print out a log so we can see it. The first things first, we're going to make sure our game mode's set. By default, we do have a game mode, so beginner multiplayer game mode.cpp and .h. We'll be putting our game mode logic in here and having a separate game state for this to interact with. So let's go to settings, world settings, and game mode override is currently none. So we want to set it. So that game mode is called beginner multiplayer game mode. So here's beginner multiplayer game mode. We set it, file save all, and we're good to go. We can close that. Let's create our game state. So C++ classes, project, public. I'm just going to place it in here. Right click, new C++ class. And this is a game state base, or a game mode base. So we're going to create a game state base. So here's game state base. And I'm just going to call it, let's keep the naming consistent. So beginner multiplayer game state base. And hit create class. So there are game states and there are game state bases, just like there's game modes and there's game mode bases. Pretty much if you're using a game mode base, you're going to want to use a game state base. If you're using a game mode, you're going to want to use a game state. And pretty much each of those have the game states and the game modes. Those come with more functionality that we just don't really need because we're not going to be touching on any of that in these tutorials. Did high reload actually work? I'm going to assume not, but it's never actually like worked in a long time. That's cool. All right, so I want to go ahead and close down my character. That's no longer needed. And open up our game state. Do the basic stuff like creating a constructor. And I think our include path might be okay. Just going to assume. Okay, so now let's go and take a look at the game mode base. So a game mode base. We're going to look at the documentation of it. And let's just search for game state. So it currently has variables, and one of the variables that it has is the actual game state. So it returns a game state base. Well, that's what the variable type is. We can keep going down. We also have get game state, and this is a template. So what we can do is if we have our game state assigned to our game mode, a specific one, what we can do is simply use that template to automatically cast it for us. So for example, I go to settings, world settings. Here you can see game state class. So if we head over to, where was it? Game state class. I think there's a set, whoops. Okay, there's not. So there's a set, where in the world am I? Yeah, there's a game state class, so we could set the variable to that game state class in the constructor, and I believe it will change to use whatever game state we specify. But what I want to do is I want to create a blueprint class to just do that in blueprint. So here we have our beginner multiplayer game mode. I'm gonna right click, create a blueprint class, and I'll just store this inside of content. So BP underscore beginner multiplayer game mode. And what I'm going to do is on the right hand side, game state class, going to be our beginner multiplayer game state base. Compile save. And now back over in our world settings, we're going to choose our BP version of that. And as you can see, our game state class has already been set up. So we can just save all, and we are pretty much done with all that. And now we need to start writing the actual functionality. So inside of our projectile, one thing that we really want to do is check authority. So I want to do a check here. So I'll just print out a log. hit a physics object, and I want to make sure that this, I don't know if this will fire on the client because I don't think they are technically simulating physics, but we'll figure that out here in a second. Plus I need to do a normal compile anyways for the game state related stuff just to help it along. So hopefully we should only be seeing this see this being printed when we hit one of these objects. Right, shoot that. It prints, I shoot him. And it doesn't print until it rolls into, and it didn't make it. So that is what we want. So what I'm going to do is else, we're going to try to do a cast. So if other, well, we're not going to do that directly. We need to include our character. So we're going to do hashtag include beginner multiplayer character.h. And if a beginner multiplayer character equals cast a beginner multiplayer character from other actor, which is the actor that got hit, then we know that we hit a character. So from here, we're going to get the game mode. So if a beginner multiplayer game mode GM equals, now we need to include it. Let's go ahead and include our game mode like so. So if our game mode equals get game, or what is it, get world, get game, get authoritative game mode, and it's a template. So what we're going to do is we're going to cast it to a beginner multiplayer game mode, like so. And that should hopefully get our game mode for us. But I'm missing a, oh, whoops. There we go. So this should hopefully get our game mode. So now we can call functions on it. But one thing we want to do as well is check if we have authority. So else if, let's see, has authority. So if we're running on the server, we're going to go ahead and cast our character. If it's valid, meaning we hit another player of a specific class, we're going to go ahead and get our game mode. From here, we can call functions on it. So let's create one of those functions. So I want to do void player hit and create the implementation. So now on here, I want to get our game state. So what I'm going to do is include beginner multiplayer game state base. So now we're going to do if a beginner multiplayer game state base GS for game state equals get game state, and it is a template. So a beginner multiplayer game state base, and we're going to interact with our game state. So I'm going to print out a log here. So player hit game mode. Just copy this. Let's go to our game state and create another just public section for our function. We're just going to call it void on player hit. Or we can actually just leave the name the same. Yes, stop it. So generate the implementation for that and print out another log. Player hit game state. So from our game mode, all we're going to do is GS player hit. And what we're going to do on the game state is we're going to increment a variable. So it's going to start at 0. So uint, I don't know, let's just do 16 to give us a big range. And total hits will be the name of it. Let's go to our constructor and set it to 0. And Now what we want to do in our player hit function, we're just going to take total hits and increment it. So from here, I just want to print it out on the server. Or let's see, server total hits percent D for decimal value, or not a decimal value. Total hits is what we're going to print out. So player hit should only fire on the server. So I'm going to do a quick check. If has authority, then we're going to run everything because we don't want to set stuff that's in the game state on the client. We want everything that gets set on the game state to be done from the server. So I'm not doing any authority checking in the game mode because the game mode only exists on the server. So the way we have it right now is, let's go ahead and call the function real quick. So GM for game mode, player hit. When our projectile hits something, we're going to check if it's a physics object like these cubes right here. If it's not, then we're going to check and make sure we're on the server. If we are, we're going to check and see if what we hit is of a type a beginner multiplayer character. So it's going to be another player for us. If that ends up being true, we get our game mode. We go ahead and just cast it to our game mode type that we want, which is our custom one. Well, the default one actually in our case. And from there, we call a function we made called player hit. So this is being performed on the server. So player hit then gets the game state, casts it to our custom type of a beginner multiplayer game state base, and then we call player hit on the game state. And all that does on the game state is we check if we're on the server to make sure. We increment total hits and print out 2 logs. So from here, we want to replicate total hits, but let's see how it works first. So I got to reload it. I'm going to move that spawn out of the way. So a client shoots the server, as you can see. Player hit game mode, player hit game state, and then on the server we print out total hits 1. Now to be 2, 3, 4, 5. Now let's have the server do the same. Should be going to 6. And it goes up to 10. So it is working as intended. Now we just want to set that variable to replicate so that way clients can, see what happens. So as usual, I never actually bother to type out the get lifetime replicated props. I just copy and paste. Speaking of which, where did I put it? So we're going to go to our game state base, paste it on in. I'll just remove that. So we have our get lifetime replicated props. Now to use it, we want to include net Unreal Network, and this should be okay here in a second. Oh well. So now we want to set some replicated variables in it. So we're going to do rep lifetime. We don't want any conditions. The class is going to be a beginner multiplayer game state base, and then our variable, which is total hits. So now we need to set total hits to replicate. So in our game state base, we're going to do a U property, replicated, and I'm going to do replicated using equals. Now we need to create our function, so it's going to be a U function. Void OnRep. Let's see what would be a good name, or just the variable name. So OnRep total hits. So it's going to be replicated using OnRep total hits. And all this is going to do is print out client total hits and then display the value of total hits. So let's go ahead and compile. So we should see one print for the server and one for the client, both with the same values. And we will see this get printed for as many clients as there are. So if we have one server and two clients, this highlighted section will be printed out twice to the log, whereas this will only be printed once because it is running on the server. Now, if you recall from how we did things previously with OnReps regarding our shooting, we are not calling OnRep total hits from the server because the variable is already replicating. The only thing I'm using this for is to act like an event. So when this variable changes, I want the clients to have an event fire. So for example, I shoot, player hit game mode, player hit game state, server total hits 1, and client total hits 1. And you can see that little delay there for the replication. Just like so. So player hit game mode, player hit game state, server total hits 20, client 20. So now let's go to, we'll just do 4 clients. I'll just have the server shoot one of them. So as you can see, we have one server right here that I'm jumping with, one client, two client, and three client. So because it's set up as an OnRep, server printed out once, and all 3 clients printed it out because this OnRep worked as an event to trigger anytime total hits replicated. So I would put my functionality in here to trigger an event or something like that in Blueprint to alter my widget if I wanted to have a little HUD kind of thingy that constantly displayed the total amount of hits that was occurring. And because it is part of the game state, it should always be like all of this, like these variables should always be relevant. So unlike the projectile, which you had to worry about, or the door, for example, is a better one, which you had to worry about relevancy. So if you were 5,000 miles away, that's a bit of exaggeration, let's say 5 miles away, and someone opened this door, you would not see the door open. You wouldn't know that the door opened because you were not relevant to the door. But as you come and you walk closer, let's say you're within just 100 yards, for example, you will see that door open. Well, it'll at least be an open state because odds are you'll be too far away before it even triggers that you're relevant, so you won't see the actual animation. But you will now become relevant because you're close enough or whatever other, conditions there are for you to be relevant, and the door will now be open for you. Well, the game state, you don't have to, that doesn't happen. Whenever these variables replicate, well, get changed on the server, and assuming they're replicated, they will replicate down to the client, just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There's no real condition there unless you set one for, just unless you set one. So that's pretty much the best way I can think of to explain it. And I'm hoping that was helpful because that's pretty much the only way I could think of for a good use case of the game mode and game state. But continuing on with what I previously said, well, reiterating, the game mode is where you put your logic. This exists only on the server, not on the clients. So a client, for example, cannot call player hit. However, the game state does exist on both the clients and the server. So you would want to put all of the information that you want all of the clients to know about in here. So just like with Call of Duty, if you're playing like a Demolition or something like that, or Team Deathmatch or Search and Destroy, you want to have your team's score stored in the game state, and you want to have that score replicated so other clients know what it is. So you would change it from the server, and because it's replicated, the clients would end up knowing about it. And whether or not you have it set up as an event, if you assuming you have it set up like me, you can trigger an event like this that will update your widget to display the new amount of information, such as points of your team due to flag capture or points for kills and all that kind of stuff, or whatever. So I think that's about as far into this as I can really think of to go. Um, because it's similar to this, I think I'm going to, actually, no, I'll make it another section. We'll be going into the player state next. And the player state, for the most part, it's kind of the same deal as the game state, but I'll make it, if you're not sure what the difference is, I'll make it clear in the next video. So anyways, I hope you found this useful, and if you want to help support me and you like what I'm doing, a link to my Patreon's in the description. If you have any questions or anything like that, you can also find a link to my Discord server as well. So as always, I will see you in the next video, and I'm going to make these protected real quick. And done. So I'll see you in the next video. Take care.